Hello everyone. I'm Kia. I hope you guys are having fun. Thank you so much for having me. It's really a huge honor for me to be here, and I would like to thank all of the ViteConf organizers and staff for making this happen. I know how hard it is to organize an event of this size, so thank you so much for having me, ViteConf, and thank you all for joining this big event. Today, my talk is deep dive into VitePress. For those who don't know what VitePress is a Vite-powered static site generator. It can build any kind of static website, and with this talk, I'll try to introduce what VitePress can do, and more importantly, how VitePress does all of the things it does. However, before going into the talk, please let me introduce myself a bit. I'm Kia. I'm a web designer and also a developer. I'm Vue.js core team member and currently focusing on, well, obviously, VitePress. I'm working at Global Brain, which is one of the largest venture capital in Japan. We have offices around the world and doing startup investments everywhere. I'm pretty sure there's lots of startups members joining this event as well. So if you have any cool ideas about your business, please feel free to hit me on Twitter or somewhere else, and I might be able to help. Okay, enough about me. Let's dive into VitePress. So what is VitePress in the first place? VitePress is a Vite and Vue-powered static site generator. So you can build any static website with Vite's super fast dev server, and it can write content in Markdown. Well, I think many static site generator out there can do this, but I mean, writing contents in Markdown is kind of basic thing that all of the static site generator can do, but VitePress can too. And more importantly, it can use Vue component inside Markdown file. So if you're a Vue developer, you might already know about VitePress, which is very similar, or maybe I should say it's pretty much the same thing as VitePress, but it was built on top of Webpack, where VitePress is built on Vite. The point is that you can use Vue component inside Markdown, and the render output of those Vue component will get server-side rendered and become static HTML, CSS, and JavaScript at the end. So now let's see the basic usage of VitePress. In this talk, I'm not planning to explain each features of VitePress, but rather would like to talk about how VitePress do all of those features, and how it integrates with Vite, and how it uses Vite to accomplish static site generation. But to do so, we need to have basic understanding of what VitePress can do. So let's quickly go through the basic features that VitePress offers. The very minimum VitePress setup will look like this. First, you create your project folder, then put package.json and index.md. As you can see, the index.md is a root file, and you write anything in this Markdown. And then you install VitePress via npm, then run VitePress through like npx VitePress command. And then you get this website up and running on your local machine. You kind of see the Markdown file got parsed. There's a heading server 1 and level 2 with its contents. Even this single Markdown file, it comes with this outline features where you can see at the right side of the page, we have light and dark mode switch on top right of the page. So by the way, even this no config single Markdown file, it looks pretty clean and beautiful. So maybe this works pretty well on your resume website or something simple like that. But with this setup, we only have one single page, and that's not enough for most of the website. So you can further customize your website by adding configs. To do so, place config.js under the .vitepress folder. And in this file, you can add many configs such as site title, languages, description. These are the metadata for the website. You can add navbar config, which is the header of this website. And you can add sidebar, which is shown on the left side of the page. And after doing all of the configuration and adding more files inside the folders, and finally, you get website something look like this. This is the off-shelf documentation website for VitePress. As you can see, there's a sidebar navigation, search button, and header. You have different navigation. You can even add ads. I'm hiding it in the screen, but on the right bottom of the corner, you can see you can put the advertisement and such. Now, VitePress comes with this default theme, which is focused on creating documentation website. which is why VitePress offers features that are required by most of the documentation website by default, such as having sidebars and displaying the outline of the page. However, but again, VitePress is a static site generator and not a documentation website generator. So it just happens to be that the current main usage is for creating documentation because, Markdown is quite good at building documentations, right? But the default theme is focused on adding features related to documentation website because of that. But it can use any Vue component inside it. In fact, all of the default theme is built with Vue component. So we have more example, which is not really a documentation. For example, I forgot to mention, but Vite website is also built with VitePress. And it makes sense because Vite website is Vite documentation website, right? So we want to use VitePress. But on Vite website, you see pages like theme page. Well, this page is not a custom page, but rather included in VitePress default theme, but it's quite hard to write this kind of page with Markdown, right? So we use Vue component for this. The source code of this page looks like this. This is actually a Markdown file. There's no Markdown syntax you find here, but you can really mix Markdown content and Vue component together. Here you see we import Vue components and using it just as if this is a Vue single file component. So again, VitePress default theme is focused on creating documentation website. You can use VitePress to create any static website. It doesn't have to be a documentation. Another example would be this one. This is a website I built recently at my company. It doesn't use any of VitePress default theme. The theming is completely original, but it's still using VitePress. So if you are a Vue developer and if you want to have static website and use Vue, write content, VitePress might be one of your choice, even for things that are not a documentation. Now, I hope you have a basic understanding of what VitePress can do. Now, let's go into how VitePress works. Again, I'm not going through the features of VitePress, but rather look into how VitePress enables those features and how it uses Vite to do so, like to do anything that VitePress does. Now, VitePress is deeply integrated to Vue because the whole point of VitePress is it's Vite and Vue-powered static site generator. However, as you already know, Vite is not locked in to Vue. You can use Vite with many other JavaScript frameworks such as React, Solid, Svelte, and such, right? So by learning how VitePress uses Vue, you may apply the same technique for other frameworks too. And that's what I'm hoping you guys would learn and, create some awesome software and make the world better. In order to understand how VitePress works, the most precise thing you can do is look into the source code. Oops, sorry. Which is this. Well, there are lots of files, but you only have to look into source folder. But even for me, it was kind of overwhelming to go through each file. In fact, I was planning to open this source folder on my text editor and show everyone the low source code and go through lines by lines. But well, it was harder than I thought. So there are lots of codes. So instead, I'll pick important part of the code and explain as simple as much as I can. It becomes a bit more abstract, but I hope you'll get more glance idea of what VitePress is doing. And after you know what it does, and if you go through the actual source code, you will get better understanding. So I made the following slides to match the actual source code structure as much as possible. So I hope it will make it easier for you to locate the corresponding code once after you saw the slides. So the core components. VitePress has two big components, which is client-side code and server-side code. Client code is in the client folder, and server-side code is on node folder. Client code runs on browsers, and server-side code runs on server-side, but it's a static site generator. So in production environment, there's no VitePress server up and running. Vite server, I should say, maybe. But so usually the server-side code means that the code runs on your local machine. Inside client folder, we have two different types of client code. One is called app, and the other is C. App code is the core VitePress code. It handles all basic features such as routing, hot module replacement, DevTools integration, and managing the site metadata, loading configs, and such. Theme code, on the other hand, is, in this case, named theme default, is a theme-specific code. All of the config that only relates to theme will be used in this code only. So if you want to build your own website without using the theme, none of this theme code will be running. So we can completely delete this folder and VitePress would work without a problem. Now, the best way to understand how some application works is to go through step by step from the entry point. By that, I mean, if we want to create a static site generator, what do we need to do at the beginning? Like, how do we start the dev server, or how can we build a code? Well, we need CLI command. We need to have some command to start building the website. That means VitePress is a CLI application. So VitePress has several commands that the main ones does. Main ones are these ones: VitePress dev and VitePress build. Dev command will boot up dev server using Vite, and build command will build the production build. So let's check out what happens when we execute these commands. First of all, which file will these commands run? Actually, it's in the bin folder, and it looks like this. Well, that's it. This is a simple JS file, and it's loading CLI.js under dist folder. Now, this folder is where compiled file gets generated, because VitePress is written in TypeScript. So the actual CLI file is under source/node folder. And let's see how that looks like. It looks like this. Well, you don't have to worry so much about details because these are just handling users' CLI input. But now we can see what the actual command is doing at the moment. Now let's see what dev command is doing. It's doing this. Okay, so the first line is the dev command, right? The main thing it does is creating a dev server and starting it. It looks like it's doing more, but let's focus on dev server things here. It creates a new server and starting it. Okay, so where does this create dev server is coming from? It comes from source/node/server.ts file. It looks like this. I'm not showing everything here, but stay with me. I'm gonna go through it. Maybe it does. Mainly, it does two things here. One, it resolves the config. Well, because we need to apply any config the users defined, so that the first thing we do is to resolve the config. I'm not going to look into config file because all it does is tries to set default value for the config. If any user input is given, it will use that and use that instead of the default one. But because there's lots of config, the config file is quite huge. But what it does is simple. It just loads all users' config and set up the final config object that should be used throughout the app code. Now the next thing it does is this, which is actually the last thing it does. It creates a dev server. Now you can see that it's calling a create Vite server, which is imported from Vite. This is actually it. It's calling Vite server, and there's nothing else it does in this file. The part we should be focusing is here. Plugins we passed into this server. So here you can see that this plugin is named create Vite plugin. So essentially, VitePress is just a Vite plugin. It does all of the things as Vite plugin. And also now you can see how it is easy to create Vite server programmatically, right? You just import create server from Vite and run it. And you can create your own Vite server. So if you want to create any custom command that's going to boot up Vite server, this is how you do it. Now, let's go into create VitePress plugin function. What does it do? Now, this function, the plugin function, comes from source/node/plugin folder. Now, from here, things get interesting. And more complicated, of course. Now, this is the actual source code, but as you can see, and I don't have enough space to show all the actual code, so let's cut off some codes here and make it simple. The main goal here is to create Vite plugin. So that code looks like this. Now, Vite plugin is an object with lots of configuration you can add. You can find all of the documentation at Vite website to learn what kind of options they have. But here again, let's focus on what matters for VitePress. As a Vite plugin, what we want to do is transform a given Markdown file to something that Vite can handle. Because as a default, Vite does nothing for Markdown file, right? So if some Markdown comes in, we need to do, well, whatever VitePress want to do with that file. To do so, we have transform option in Vite plugin, which look like this. Here, I'm cutting off not that important code and only showing the important ones, but here it is. You can see that it's trying to handle incoming file. The first if statement checks if the file extension is .view or not. Well, VitePress renders Markdown, but it can also handle view file directly too. So if any view file comes in, not Markdown file, but the view file comes in, we'll just handle it. We just handle that too. You see, there is a process client JS function. This is the function that processes any user-defined JavaScript code written in the file and add to the hash map. So we can use that with rendered output on the final output. But it's not really the huge things. Don't worry so much about this. The next if statement is looking for .md extension, which is the Markdown. In this case, incoming file is actually the Markdown file. In this case, we need to parse the Markdown file in order to process the file later on. How we do this is to parse Markdown file into view source code and then pass it down to the Vite pipeline. After that, Vite can handle view file via its view plugin. So all we have to do here is transform Markdown file and make it view file. To do that, we have this Markdown to view function, which returns view SLC object, view source object, and the view source object gets passed to process client JS file as the same as we did when transforming the view file. Actually, this is the key part of VitePress. It handles Markdown. Now let's go see what Markdown to view file does. The actual name of Markdown to view command is the return function from create Markdown to view render function. Now that's a long name, but it's quite precise. This function returns function that can parse Markdown, taking user configs into account. Now, again, it's very complicated and looks like many things are going on, but let's look at important part of this code. The first one is this, create Markdown renderer. This function is creating a pure Markdown renderer function that can later use to actually render the Markdown content, which means convert Markdown into HTML. Let's see how it looks like. This is the function. This function looks fairly simple, I will say. You can see that it's creating a new Markdown instance, Markdown it instance, and Markdown it is very famous Markdown parser for JavaScript, and VitePress uses it too. All it does is creating a new Markdown it instance and adds lots of Markdown plugins. As you can see, there's a lots of md.use function it's called. These are adding plugins to Markdown parser. Many plugins are usual Markdown plugins, not special to VitePress, such as highlight the line plugin highlights the code block. It's it's using Ishii as a plugin. The special one that I would like to mention here is component plugin that you can see at the very first plugin to be added. This plugin handles view component inside Markdown file. It allows view component code inside Markdown file and be executed. This plugin is actually published as a different package called mdit-view. There's lots of different view-specific Markdown plugins published here. So if you are planning to create software that uses Markdown parsing with Vue, please check it out. It uses cool technique to handle view file. And if you're trying to create parser for other frameworks like React, I'm pretty sure you can find cool ideas from this package so that you can apply it to those frameworks as well. Now let's get back to Vite plugin code. Remember, here's where we left off. We've created Markdown parser. There's still lots of things going on, but there are a few things that I want to point out, which is simple but interesting technique to apply when parsing the Markdown to actual HTML output. In same file, parsed, we call Markdown function we've created earlier. Here, now this HTML variable contains parsed Markdown file. And here, we actually create view source object. Remember, this is the object we return from this function so that it gets passed to Vite, and Vite handles this object as a view file. There's a few things it doesn't, which I didn't go through, like it's passing injected page data code and stuff. But the important part is that there is a template string, this one. So what it's doing here is it's passing parsed HTML inside the template tag. Because in view file, you wrap all the HTML code inside template tag. So what it does here is that's trying to create an actual view file. This might be obvious for someone with familiar with Vite, but this is a good takeaway from this code. Basically, we want Vite to handle code as much as possible. And we know that Vite can handle view code. So all we need to do here is to convert or transform Markdown file into view code that Vite can understand. That means if you create some custom Vite plugin that passes, I don't know, but something other than Markdown, the same logic goes here. You get the file you want to convert, then transform it to the file format where Vite can understand. Then everything else will be handled by Vite. Just remember this. Now we're capable of handling Markdown file. Now we need to return index.html to the client, which is down here. Now in normal Vite application, you would have index.html file under your project folder as an entry point. But in VitePress, we don't have index.html. So we need to create it and send it back to the client. So we use server middleware to interact the response and send back this empty HTML. Remember, this is dev server, so it's not a production build. So all we need is pretty much empty index.html content, and the content that client can fill in the rest of the data, things like metadata such as title of the site and such. VitePress creates a full HTML with all of the content rendered on production build, but in dev server we don't need to do that. And other than this, VitePress has many more configs to handle things like hot module replacement and such. But here I'm kind of going short of the time, so let's move to the client-side code here. You can always look into the source code and learn about more advanced technique after later on. So once we know that now the server side is returning this index HTML, on the client side, what we do is more straightforward, I would say. Well, the code itself is a bit complicated, but what it does is it creates new view app. Here you can see app.mount method, which is view way of mounting view component to the DOM. It's nothing special. This is a plain view app. There's no create VitePress app or something like that. It's just a view. Well, we are wrapping everything on in-browser if statement here because VitePress is a server-side rendering application, right? In production mode, it's going to run this command on the server side, so this only runs on dev server. However, the app contents that we're mounting has VitePress specific features, and it looks like this. It's creating a client-side router, adding default components such as not found component. It's injecting some VitePress specific data to the child components and such. But from here, because we've done all heavy lifting on Vite side, on server side, this is just a simple client-side code. By that, I mean, for example, we don't pass Markdown on client side because it's already done on server side. So the client code works as if there's a fixed view file written to the actual file system, and it's same as loading those fixed view file from the file system, right? And at last, this is the theme file. It's loading the default theme as a default view component, which looks like this. This is even more plain view file than app file. This is just a typical view component. There's lots of slots and so many things going on because there are many customization you can do with the default theme, but still it's just a plain view file. This is the default theme. So from here on, none of these codes matter if you would like to have your own custom VitePress theme. No core feature is included here. So if you don't care so much about how default theme is created, you can just ignore all of the theme-default folder, and you can just look into app folder and see what it's doing. Now, sorry, I've skipped lots of things on client side, but I'm kind of getting short on time. But I hope you're getting some idea on how VitePress works and how it's integrated with Vite. So let's go into the final big command that Vite has, which is build command. This command will build the final static HTML file when it gets executed. This is how build function looks like. Once again, well, it's complicated. Now for build, what we want to do is pretty much the same as before. We want to parse Markdown and finally output it on HTML. And instead of returning the output HTML from Vite dev server, we want to output it to file system as a static file. To do so, we need to render it. And that's why we have render function inside this build command. The render function looks like this. Here, it gets the render object by passing in the file path. Because we want to render all pages, right? So instead, inside promise.all function, we pass all of the pages. Now, the actual render function inside node/build/render.ts file, here we define how we render the given file. Again, as always, lots of things going on, but the important part is this. Now, it seems more simple. It's just rendering HTML as a string. The content variable inside the body tag is the content got rendered from the file. As you can see, it's wrapped inside a div with ID of app, which means this is the div that view will mount on. Once we get this string of HTML, what we need to do is to render it to the file system. And we use FS module from Node to do that. Well, I've skipped so many codes. For example, it also output like JS and CSS chunks. So it creates like subfolders and such. But I think you get the idea of what we're trying to do here. We're just trying to render a file into a string and then save it as plain HTML file. Now, if you find anything that interests you, please go into the actual source code of VitePress. And by focusing on how it uses Vite and how it handles incoming files, you will learn so much about how Vite plugin works. I'll pick important part of the code, but at the same time, I've skipped lots of things as well. But I hope you got some idea on what Vite plugin would look like. And I hope it made you more familiar on writing Vite plugin. Because VitePress is a standalone CLI application, but as I've shown, VitePress is a Vite plugin. And also it's one of the official big project that Vue community manages. So if you're looking for a way to learn how to create Vite plugin or looking for an idea of what Vite plugin can do, I think VitePress is one of the software you might want to look into it. Also, it's good software to write your documentation or create static website too. So yeah, please check out the VitePress. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Kia. If you have any question or just want to say hi, I'm always open on Twitter, so just let me know. Thanks so much, and I hope you keep enjoying the rest of the event. Thanks so much.